Hi, everybody. So I'm starting the group critique a little bit earlier for this week, and I'll just continue it every day and keep adding to it. If you saw my note at the top of the thread, I'm going to be traveling on Friday, and I'm just a little concerned about how much time I'll have. So I thought, hey, I'll just get started when people post, and that way, you know, by Friday, um, I'll I'll be able to probably fit in, the last few projects that get submitted on by the Thursday deadline. Um, Okay, so we are in the second to last installment of the character. So we've got this assignment, and then you're going to take the feedback from this particular assignment and any changes you want to make on your own and post them for our final group critique. And so our task 3 is due on Sunday. So I'll be coming in hopefully Monday to give a little bit of feedback. I will say though, a lot of people will at this point be getting pretty close to being done, which is pretty normal. Some people have a little further to go, and some people might just have a few sort of odds and ends that they can work on for the final task and the final submission. But again, depending upon where you're at, it could be really pretty final stages. Um, Okay, so Randall, so if I saw your project in week 6 in the final submission, I'd say, hey, this looks good. It's like, it's very technically complete. It feels quite polished. Um, and the character's really alive and fun. And, so to me it has a very complete feeling. However, since here we are, we still have a little bit of a ways to go. I'm maybe going to give you some suggestions here on how you could even take this to the next level, even though I do think this is really pretty complete at this point. So you're welcome to use any of my suggestions or not, or just keep experimenting on your own. It's up to you. As always, this is critiques are all about, trying to find your own voice in a way. And as an instructor, sometimes I give feedback that maybe the direction I might go with something, just because sometimes it's easier to kind of give different kinds of solutions than to just say, oh, hey, keep experimenting, because what does, that can be pretty vague. So I'll give you maybe some ideas um, for how I think you could just enliven this a little more. So let's start with the character. So with the character design, so I think the arms look how they're sort of very liquid and kind of elegant. They're very, they've got all these beautiful curves and they've got a lot of movement. And then the body, in contrast, is has a sort of a pretty blocky feeling, which it's okay. It's like a kind of a contrast. But I was sort of wondering, well, what if you maybe made it have a little more liveliness as well? And there's maybe a couple ways to do that. One way, let's go to that layer here, is to just kind of maybe add some like so instead of so he's Rock and Rhapsody Roy. What if he's like kind of like grooving a little bit more? Like maybe he's not sort of just flat on the floor, but maybe he's um, maybe he's like sort of like kind of angled up on one foot, and then of course, you'd move that head around a little bit too. But maybe he's like kind of, sort of, you know what I mean? So maybe he's like levitating a little bit, one foot down, one foot up, something like that. Can you see how that starts to even, or you could go the other way. Maybe that would work better, um, angling the other way. Uh, who knows? You could experiment with. Oops. Always got to hold down that shift key when you're transforming. Otherwise, whatever appeals to you, that can kind of create just a little bit more of that movement. Something else you could do, maybe in conjunction with angling it or not, is you could actually use the puppet warp to add some curves into your character. And I won't do that now because it takes a lot of like processing with the video to do puppet warp, but uh, like you can, we did puppet warp back in week 3, right? With the guy where we flipped his neck back, his head back, his head back. There's a lot you can do more with puppet warp where you can make things kind of bulge, so you can kind of create these curves. You can bulge him out or bulge him in a little bit, that are pretty easy to do. So you might want to experiment with that, just kind of changing the form here. You could do it very subtly, and that would already make him look more animated, almost like he's breathing in or breathing out, his whole body. You could sort of think about that. Or maybe when he jumps and it comes down, his body bulges a little bit. You can sort of think about that. Um, as far as tutorials, if that sounds like something you're interested in, Puppet Warp, I think there's a lot of tutorials online, for how to make things kind of curve or bulge. So you could just kind of Google Puppet Warp and curve or bulge, and just sort of look at some. It's very, let's see, if we go to the layers panel and click on this, and I'm going to go up to edit and Puppet Warp in here. So you can see it creates this mesh, and then you can just start putting in these pins, um, you know, to start kind of anchoring everything. So you want to kind of put a lot of pins in and then sort of play with it. Again, it takes a little bit of fiddling, but you can start sort of seeing. You could even try Puppet Warp. You could also try Puppet Warp instead, uh, or Perspective Warp. Is that that's what I mean? Up here, up in the edit menu, perspective warp can sometimes also be interesting to do. So something like that, so you can see here, I've got some kind of little glitches in here. That's why using a tutorial to get the curve is a better idea than what I just did, because I just kind of created these little kind of divots in it. And so but you can see how you can do some really interesting things with that. Okay, so that's a suggestion for the character, and then for the background, I so I don't know whether students take color theory by this point. Some students do, and some students don't. But in general, what happens with warm saturated colors, like warm colors being red and yellow and orange, they come forward, whereas cooler colors, and I always throw kind of black into that, as being kind of a cooler color, or blacks or grays, um, they tend to be more desaturated. They tend to kind of recede. And so what's happening here is the background is kind of coming forward, and we kind of want to maybe put the spotlight more on the character. So how can we do that without changing, with kind of doing it more subtly? Because I mean, I do really like this background. I think the warm colors work really well for your character. So in a way, I'm sort of thinking, what maybe there's some way that we can do a very sort of selective kind of change to some of the colors potentially. And so let me just show you. So if you just kind of go up to hue and saturation, and and so desaturating, let's just clip this. Desaturating is when you kind of suck some of the intensity out of the color, like the pigment. So you can see what I'm doing here, and you can see how what it's doing here is kind of making it more subdued or muted. And then what that's actually doing, so if you sort of look at your character as you do that, this is where it's great to have an adjustment layer, because you can turn it on or off and really examine it. You can see that the character is starting to look more substantial. We're actually starting to see more of the color in here, like more of the form and the shape and the subtleties of it. So that's good. And I like what that's doing, but at the same time, it's also making, I think, the background look a little drab, which I really think some of the intensity of color can be really, really good. So maybe what we could do is selectively, so let's bring it back to normal here, selectively do something. And again, this is just a suggestion. You don't have to do it this. I'm just kind of, sort of giving some maybe things about how I might want to, kind of play with this. But what we could maybe do is maybe we want to leave the yellow lights behind there since they're so beautiful, and maybe we could tone down a little bit of the reds, which are more around the character, here. So what we could do in the saturation area here is we can go and we can select just the reds, and then we can experiment and say, oh, let's turn down the reds. Now maybe it doesn't even need that much, maybe just, let's see here, go up to 0 again. 0, okay, that's the original. Let's see, maybe that. Let's just close it out here and then experiment. Maybe that just kind of gives it, a little bit. Maybe you could also maybe you could desaturate the yellows a tiny bit if you wanted to. Um, so anyhow, you could play with the background just a little bit. And again, keeping an eye on just making your character the thing that is standing out the most. Okay, so I think that's it. What about that shadow? Could we maybe make that shadow just a tiny bit darker? What do you think? Oops, maybe? I don't know. Maybe you had a good choice there to begin with. Yeah, maybe, but maybe you could. I'm just thinking, it seems like you really want to be able to see that. But yeah, so anyhow, so that's what I would maybe play with a little bit more. Is just animating the character as more than you have it, and then maybe subduing the background a little bit. See how that works. Or any other changes you think you'd make as you sort of. Sometimes what happens is after you've been working on something for a while, you can open it the next day or a few days later and go, oh, hey, I think I could really move that around and change that. And the wonderful thing about, PSDs is that, through adjustment layers, which you've done a great job here with all of your adjustment layers, adjusting the lighting, which was really awesome what you did here. That looks great. So it looks more backlit. I like that idea. Um, but what you can really do, obviously, is like continue to build in there without making any destructive changes in your character. Another thing you can do too is actually resave your entire PSD like you've been doing so that you have a backup if you want to just kind of like, because sometimes it's hard to keep track of all the changes you make, even if you're doing it non-destructively here with adjustment layers and such. Um, okay, all right, good job. Okay, all right, we're going to continue on with our critique. It's Thursday. We've got a couple projects to review. Let's see. So, Rachel, just at the highlights. Good. Yeah, I noticed that, yeah, your garden glitter grace really you've increased a lot of the saturation on your character, which oh, yeah, I'm glad you it looks like you put all of your character into its own folder here in the layers panel. That's a great idea. That way, it's not like taking over your layers panel. But yeah, I like what you did here with all of the adjustments. Kind of just sort of, yeah, look at that, sort of really bringing them to life a little bit more. I think that's wonderful. And what that also, when you saturate or intensify colors, they tend to come forward because saturated colors come forward. And I think that was really good for your character. Okay, so overall, I think this is looking good. I only have just a few suggestions here. Um, I always have suggestions, it's my job. One thing I noticed is you have these really cute little feet down below, but because they're sort of being hidden by the skirt, it's like she doesn't really have feet, like because they're so hidden and then they're kind of blending in. So I don't know if you thought about this, but I was thinking, I wonder if like putting them, bringing them forward a little bit more, like pulling them out, would, let's see this one here, if we rotate it a little bit, kind of give her these feet that somehow really um, give her a little more animation. When you see a body part like that, then suddenly you're like, oh, she's got feet, she's moving her feet. I don't know. I just thought it was kind of cute the way that they were there, and that they seemed to, be like a really nice part of the design that you could amplify. And then maybe if you wanted to, I like the color fine, I think the color works, but maybe, you'd adjust the color with those as well, but something to think about. And so the last thing on your character, and I really do think the character is looking really good at this point, is can you see sort of like the line, if you trace a line through her, it kind of goes like it's leaning to the right. And when that happens, like when we see something leaning, it doesn't have to be a character, or anything like that. It makes us sort of feel like the design is falling to the right. So I might just kind of make some very subtle adjustments to her to make it look like she's not completely leaning. Like, so you could like, just subtle things you can do by changing the angles of things. Like maybe you would change the angle of, her torso, a little bit to the left. See, like that's, something just like that is all it really needs to make it appear that it's more balanced. Sometimes it's nice to exaggerate it where, you kind of really try to create an angle, like, if somebody's sort of bending their body. Okay, so that looks really good. Okay, finally, I like what you've done with your background, but I am noticing, and again, this is one of those things when you work on something for a really long time, it's very hard to actually, sometimes it's hard to see it with fresh eyes. So you know what the text says, and it makes sense to you. But then if somebody else is looking at it, I think that what they may have a little trouble reading the text. Because I know I'm having a little trouble reading it. And why is that happening? There's usually just the same things that happen with text illegibility. One is that the background is a little too busy or there's not enough contrast, and I think both those things may be happening here. Sometimes having too many treatments on the text treatments, like we add text treatments sometimes to make it more legible, to make it stand out, but sometimes those make it harder to read. So sometimes what you can try to do is maybe take some off. So that makes it a little easier to read, without the outer glow. So you could try that. You could also try a really neat trick. If the um, I don't know if the video tutorials, if all of the tutorials in the classroom cover this particular technique, but this is a cool thing to know how to do. It includes, it's where what we're going to, and you again, this is just a suggestion. There's a lot of other things you can do here to make the text more legible, including sort of changing the color of the background more. But something you can do is like fade um, a photograph, into sort of a transparent, like make it more transparent in certain areas. I mean, if you don't mind, maybe this will be helpful for somebody else too. So I'll just show you this technique. It's actually just, again, building upon what we've already done in class. So it's a really nice thing to know how to do. So if we go to your background image, I'm going to turn on the background that you have, the white background here. I'm actually going to just unlock this. We don't need to do that, but I just always like unlocking the background in case we want to edit it. But I'm going to add this because we'll want to have a white background later. Uh, well, let's turn that off for now, and then we'll see why. So we're going to go to our background copy here, and then all we're going to do here, just in one simple step, is we're going to apply a layer mask to the entire thing. Just click on it. So nothing's happening with the layer mask right now. We're going to it's there, but we haven't told it what to do. It's just white. It's just blank at this point. So what we're going to do is we're going to apply a gradient onto the mask. So we're going to click directly on that mask. We're going to go to the tool um, box and get the gradient tool. The gradient tool has a lot of different features at its, you just probably want it pretty simple here, but you can make you can see here, you can do a lot of different things. You can change the opacity. Let's make that opacity 100%. I think that's probably what it will be by default. But there's different styles of it. So I'm going to just do a really basic one, a linear one, and I'm just going to pull it up from the bottom to the top so that it goes from black to white. And you can see what it's done. That's why we want to turn on this layer here. Is you can see that it has, and I went the wrong way. So let's actually undo that and go the other way. So I'm going to go from top to bottom. You kind of have to experiment with a little bit. Okay, there we go. So you can see what it did is it actually just created like a transparent gradient. If I turn this off again, you can see that it's actually now transparent at the top, and then it goes to the photograph at the bottom. So again, you can experiment. Now this is non-destructive because we're doing it on a layer mask. So if we want to go a little less, so we can kind of just do at the top. See, so we just have a little bit of that top color in there. So now, now we can see the text really beautifully. So it's very simple and easy. Now, if you don't like the white color, so why is it white? It's because we're actually seeing. So now if you look at the layer mask here, you can see that the layer mask is now masking the top here. That's where the black color is. And then it's fading through the gray. The gray is where it gets sort of, that's that transition. And then it goes solid where we're seeing the bottom. And again, you can just totally experiment with all these different features. There's, lots of different things you can do in there. But because it's transparent at the top, we're seeing down to the white layer. So we always want to have a layer below it that has some color in it. And now what you can do with this layer is if you want to, you can experiment. Instead of having white, what we could do is, click on that layer, take our rectangle tool, and let's just draw a solid color on top of that. Then we could make it dark, or we could make it a color in, in the character, anything you want. I'll just leave it white because it's quite simple that way, but color would look nice. Okay, so that's a very easy way to get the best of both worlds, a lot of detail, but also getting in the background like empty space in different places, or sort of less active space. So it might be something that other folks might want to use as well. Okay, so it's looking good, and that's what I would suggest working on. Hey, Brooke. Um, yeah, so I think you're starting to create a really good sense of, you looks like in terms of your palette you've got green, blue, and red. So those are your palette colors, and maybe a little bit of those kind of organic brown colors in there, which I think is a nice touch. I like the way this transitions into this. Um, so I would probably say that you're still, can you know what I'm probably going to say, which is that your photograph is still too detailed, back here. You want to really try to simplify it. And I would say to, just really kind of rethink your sort of approach. Like, what does she need to be? So to me, it looks like you want her in a natural environment, Flippin' Food Fran, which I'm not quite sure why she wants to be in a natural environment in terms of the concept. Most folks kind of want to put her in some type of food environment. But if you want to do that, maybe kind of think about what kind of, maybe something related to food that would be in the background. Like maybe a tree, that has some fruit on it, or a strawberry patch, or, well, probably you don't want a strawberry patch because you don't want to compete with the strawberries in her body. But she's like made out of ice cream and strawberries and candy. So it's almost like she wants to be somewhere where that might make sense, like an ice cream shop or a kitchen. So I would really think about it. I focused a little bit on the detail in the background before, but I also think you could really think about the concept of why you want her here, and to try to figure out how you can get the background and the character to make sense together. You know, what does candy canes have to do with the background? And I know you've been thinking a lot about the color, which is good, but we can always change color in Photoshop. So it's really good to get a photograph of something that would make sense with her. So I keep thinking about that. We do still have some time for you to make that kind of modification. Um, Okay, so I think that's probably the main thing. I've mentioned some things you could do with the character with revising it, so I still have the same advice, which is to keep revising your character in these areas. So you can go back to my feedback from last week and take a look at that. And I think your text looks good. It's fairly easy to read, but you probably, again, modifying the background, you'll probably want to make some changes to that too. Again, just keep thinking about Flippin' Food Fran, who she is and what she's. A lot of times, what students do is they kind of develop a backstory for their character, like Garbage Dump Dan, goes around and picks up garbage and is made out of garbage, and he lives somewhere, in a rustic environment. Um, Flippin' Food Fran, a lot of people sort of think about, that Fran has got a job, which is, maybe doing something related to food, that she's involved with. So you can kind of sort of develop that kind of backstory so that you get some ideas about what you want for the background. Okay, all right. So that's what I keep working on, is just keep experimenting.